Now, weighted average number of common shares outstanding. Why is this important? This simple little formula, EPS, earnings per share, so net income per common stock shares outstanding. We're going to see how this tiny little formula can be so broken down and drilled down into, right? So earnings, we need to determine net income, all the components of net income. That's a whole section in and of itself. And then per share, well, how many shares are outstanding? We're going to see why this is super important. This is basically a mega base formula. It's a WACC formula, weighted average cost of capital, similar to that if you saw this in BEC. I mean, if you took BEC, I'm sure you saw it. And this is important for our denominator. Remember, your earnings per share. Something per something that's the division, right? Earnings per share, earnings divided by shares. So that's important, quite important for our formula, which, well, basic earnings per share. We have net income, right? Like I said, earnings, net income minus preferred dividends. And why do we do that? Well, because this is net income available to common stockholders, divided by weighted average number of common shares outstanding. So you see how all these formulas come together. Super important for us to know and answer questions for. We're going to obviously see this more in depth. Let's keep running on. And what do I got for you next? Well, the diluted earnings per share. Now, the best way to describe this formula, this is this is more conservative. So earnings per share is trying to tell you how expensive is this company? Because if I'm paying, if I want to buy $1 of earnings, right? Like $1 of earnings, how many shares does that get distributed over? Like holding one share entitles you to how much earnings, to how much of that net income. That's the whole point here, because I want as much net income as I can get for each share. That's why this whole ratio, this whole formula is so important. Diluted earnings per share is a little bit more conservative, like I said. So this is income available to common stockholder plus interest on dilutive securities, and then divided by weighted average number of common shares, assuming all dilutive securities are converted into common stocks. So why this is important. Yes, we could have 1 million shares outstanding, but maybe there are some bonds outstanding, and those bonds are convertible bonds. Now, convertible bonds are bonds where you can, instead of having that bond, you can choose to convert it to common stock, and the company has to issue more and give you some. So this diluted earnings per share is trying to take into account that if everyone exercised their options, everyone exercised all their bonds, if everyone converted all the common stock that they could today into common stock, what would our EPS be? So this is taking into account all other possible factors. It's more inclusive of absolutely everything. Now, are you going to, like this, when we talk about EPS, we're talking about basic EPS. When they talk about the earnings per share report on a quarterly call, right, for a company, they're talking about basic EPS. Diluted EPS, it's important as well, and maybe you as a shareholder want to know it. And both of these formulas are going to come into play when we answer questions.